This is an overview and demonstration of the Declared Emergency Expenditure form in MyFin. This form allows fiscal users to identify and track costs associated with declared emergencies for reimbursement and other activity. It identifies specific transaction details as recorded in MyFin and provides document retention for backup, approvals, authorizations, etc. Please note that users currently are required to fill out one form sequence for each transaction ID. Let's navigate to the form. Using the Homepage Navigator dropdown in the fluid header, select the Emergency Management homepage. Select the Emergency Expenditure form. Notice the grouping of 3 pages available in this section. We will start with the Emergency Expenditure form and work our way through. On the Emergency Expenditure form page, you may add a new value, or you may review existing values. I will click Search to review existing values. I only have one form. There are 2 parts to the form. There's the form input screen, which are the values that will need to be identified and filled out for the transaction. And then there is the printing of the form to PDF. The form input fields. Declared emergency. Select the emergency from the dropdown. Requester's organization. That may be selected also from the dropdown. The remaining drop-down or lookup values are the How Delivered, Expenditure Type, and Description of the Cost. The Other Grant section allows you to identify whether or not this cost is covered under another grant. If it is covered under another grant, you may check the box and put down the applicable grant name. The Procurement Method. If not on a contract, please explain the procurement process here. Enter transaction ID. Note that there are 4 types of transaction IDs: Journal ID, Purchase Order Number, P-Card Transaction Number, and Voucher ID. When entering in the journal ID, the journal date must be accompanied. And for instances where you want to only capture one line of the journal, enter the journal line number. This would be applicable, for example, in internal service fund charging. Otherwise, leave it blank and it will return all the lines of the journal identified. Purpose and justification for cost. This explanation must provide justification as to why this particular cost was necessary to respond to the emergency. This is a very important section. There is ample space to clarify and describe the cost and why it was necessary, so we would encourage users to take the appropriate time to fill this out in detail. Once all these fields have been completed, click the Save button. Let's move on to the checklist of required documents. These will be uploaded to the Attachments tab, but before we view that tab, it's important to note that all documents need to be combined into one PDF file, and that the file name must follow the naming convention on the Instructions tab. First, we'll visit the Instructions tab. It provides all the transaction ID types that will be attached to this form and examples of what they would look like. When a P card is identified and you provide documentation for the P card, you will actually provide the voucher ID and voucher line that the P card was paid on for the naming convention. That can easily be identified when we print the form to PDF. Once you have correctly named your file, review the Attachments tab screen and use the Attach button to navigate through your system and attach the file. The description field will automatically populate, and do not change any verbiage to it. It will be changed later by someone reviewing your attachment. Let's return to the form screen. That completes the user input. The last step for user input is to submit the form. There is no approval workflow, but there is reviewer capability so that these users may review the form submitted, download the transaction attachments. Let's discuss printing the form to PDF. Using the instructions located towards the bottom of the form, we ensure that the Save button has been selected. We select the PDF icon in the pop-up. we search for the report ID MFA underscore PB805. And then we select the View Report link. A user will be required to identify the form sequence number. This number can be found in the upper left-hand corner of the form after the form has been saved. We will enter the form sequence number. It's currently compiling a PDF formatted report of the form, which contains the form sequence number and the user who created it, along with all other entered form fields. There's an accounting information section, which links the accounting chart fields used in the transaction ID identified on the form. Remember how the P-card transactions, the naming convention of the backup documentation attached, must include the voucher ID and voucher line it paid on? That information can be found in the gray section. We've adequately covered how to enter the information for the transaction on the form input page. We've reviewed how to print the form to PDF. Briefly, we can look at the other pages here. For reviewers who are accessing the backup documentation for forms, you may visit the Approve and Review a Form page. All items available for review will appear here. And the last is the Print Form to PDF shortcut page, where you can look up the form ID MFA PB805 and reprint any form at any time here. This concludes the overview and demonstration of the Declared Emergency Expenditure Form in MyFin. For questions, please contact Mayor's Financial Administration at accounting@slco.org.